Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll preview Saturday's showdown in the swamp, Florida versus Alabama. We'll cover the quarterback situation, Emory and AR-15 versus Bryce Young. We'll go Florida offense versus Bama defense, talk about the Bama offense versus the Florida defense, and then we'll talk about the keys to a Florida victory to close out. We're also going to do a bonus episode for our Patreon subscribers. What a win versus Bama would mean for Dan Mullen and this program. But Will, it's finally here. It's Bama week. We're at the midway point of the week. I'm ready for Saturday already.
Yeah, man. I went to work on Monday and said, "Is it Friday yet?" Because the flight down to Florida is on Friday. I'll be driving up late from Orlando on Friday night, getting into Gainesville, getting ready to go out and tailgate before the game, and then obviously it's a 3:30 one. If it was an 8 o'clock one, I'm not sure I'd make it based on the anticipation and the amount of alcohol that'll be flowing in Gainesville. But definitely gonna make it to this one. It's gonna be awesome to see a swamp full. It's been a long time since I've been there, and very much looking forward to it.
Oh, well, you're going to have some hot weather here, 87 degrees, 80% humidity, 60% chance of rain. So could see some interesting stuff. It's going to be tough there for Bama. But Bama's coming in. Vegas doesn't think that's a problem. Bama's coming in as a 15.5-point favorite over the Gators. How are you feeling about that spread?
I mean, that's a lot of points on the road against a top 10 team or a top 12 team or whatever Florida is. I mean, look, I think Alabama deserves and has earned the right to be a favorite, but 15 and a half points is an awful lot of points against anybody in the SEC, not to mention when you're coming into their house and when it's a team that, Florida's been explosive on offense. They haven't been real effective when they got in the red zone, but they've been explosive. I think if Florida had converted in the red zone, people would have a very different feel for this game because Florida would be coming off of 2 wins where they put up 60 points. Instead, you got a game where they put up, 40, 42. And now, the question is, are they going to be able to do that against Alabama? But 15 and a half is a lot.
I have a feeling a hamstring injury has something to do with that spread, and we'll jump into that with 2 bits here. Will it's going to limit the the explosiveness of Anthony Richardson on Saturday. I think he'll play. I think he'll end up playing in this one. But if they pull the upset, we're going to have to lean on Emory Jones. Is anything inaccurate there that I just said?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how healthy he is. I think Mullen was going to rely on Emory Jones regardless, right? I mean, he clearly believes that Jones puts them in positions to succeed in a way that Richardson does not. Now, I mean, he keeps talking about having 2 good quarterbacks who can execute a system. And then every time we go out there, Anthony Richardson averaged 37 yards per play or something like that. And we're sort of left scratching our heads. But yeah, I mean, look, we've talked about it all offseason that Florida was going to need both of these guys. At some point, one of them was going to get dinged. Hey, it turns out Anthony Richardson's the first one who gets dinged, and that means Emory Jones is going to have to step up.
Well, through 2 games, we've seen some red flags in Jones's ability to read a defense and struggling to make reads in general. But that does not bode well when you go up against the Nick Saban-led defense. We need to see Jones be more decisive in this one. I think that's very important in this game. And I'll use the 2 interceptions he threw last week as an example. There was the one pick where he just took the ball, made a quick read out to the flat. He made a mistake on that play. No doubt he made a mistake. But the other interception where he dropped back, he waited too long, he hesitated, he wasn't sure about himself, ends up throwing a ball late to get intercepted toward the sideline, over the middle toward the sideline. And I'd rather see him err on the side of aggressiveness this week. If you're going to make the mistake, at least make it aggressively. How do you feel about that, Will?
Well, I mean, I think that there was improvement from week 1 to week 2. I don't think people appreciated the improvement because Anthony Richardson improved from week 1 to week 2 as well. And it turned out he was about as close to perfect as you could be in a game where you only have 7 touches. But, here's the deal is that Emory Jones was much more decisive in the run game against USF than he was against FAU. You could see that he was doing a better job of making the read of the defensive end. He was doing a better job of making sure that he got the ball to Damian Pierce for the most part when he needed to, and then was holding on the ball when he needed to as well, and had a very nice touchdown run at some point there in that run of 35 points for Florida. Obviously, he made some mistakes through the air, but I will say that in the first half specifically, when he looked more comfortable throwing the ball, Dan Mullen was doing some things in terms of rolling him out to the sideline, giving him half field reads, sort of a high-low look where you've got a deep receiver and a near receiver. And, you also have the option to run. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in this particular game. I think Mullen's probably has been exploring in the first couple of games. What does Emory Jones do well? What does he struggle with? And I don't expect him to put Jones in situations where he's going to have to make whole field reads. I think he's going to simplify the game plan this week, make sure that when it's time to throw the ball, that they've got things that Jones is comfortable with, that he's not going to hesitate because they've repped it over and over and over in practice this week. And so I suspect that there's going to be some design things that Mullen puts into the game plan that we haven't seen in week 1 and week 2, because he was trying to sort of see, okay, what can he do, right? Take the Ferrari out of the garage, see what it can do, and then go, all right, well, maybe I don't want to take it up that hill because there's potholes on that hill. I'm going to go find the straightaway somewhere. And so hopefully that's kind of what we see, is that there's a lot more straightaway for Emory Jones in this one, because Dan Mullen has seen some of his limitations and is going to be able to take advantage of the things that he's seen that he does do well.
Let's hope Dan Mullen puts him in position to make those confident, quick, aggressive decisions. I think that'll help him a lot. In terms of Anthony Richardson here, you and I are pretty much on the same page. I don't think we're breaking news to anybody out there. Anthony Richardson clearly looks like he has the much higher ceiling between the two. With the hamstring injury, are you expecting him to play a similar role to what he's played the last couple of weeks in terms of snap count?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably makes sense. The only thing that you would question is whether having him on the sideline, bring him in for the third drive and then have him on the sideline for another couple of drives. Do you maybe do things back to back so that you can warm him up, get him all ready to go, get him on the bike, have him in for a couple of different drives, and then say, okay, now we're going to sit you down. Maybe they do things a little bit differently to make sure you heat him up once in the first half and once in the second half. But I think I think Mullen has very defined plays, a very defined package that he wants to run for Anthony Richardson. He's going to bring him in this game if he's healthy enough to play. The question is going to be, is he going to have the athletic ability and the explosiveness that he's had previous to this injury? It looked like he was okay, but the hamstring tends to grab you at some point and can get worse. So we'll see what they decide to do. Maybe they even hold him out of this one just because, they want to make sure he's healthy for the rest of the year. Mullen is not exactly somebody who tells everybody in the media what's going on. And so if Richardson's going to be out, he's not going to tell anybody. And if Richardson's going to start, he's not going to tell anybody. But I suspect it'll probably be a similar type of thing where he really sort of has, 4 or 5 carries, 4 or 5 passes, depending upon how successful those passes are. And then, they'll sort of build from there depending upon how the game goes. But when it gets tight, I expect to see Emory Jones in there. That's the reality. Is I think Mullen has clearly shown he's comfortable with Emory Jones. I think he believes in Emory Jones, and we'll see whether that belief pays off.
If Richardson's out, we'll find out 15 minutes before kickoff, most likely. It'll be in the intro show for the CBS. That's my guess on that. Let's go over the Alabama sideline. Through 2 games, we've seen Bryce Young really start to live up to expectations, but the $1 million man is yet to perform in a hostile environment. Young quarterback still. No crowds last year in his first year in college. So this really is going to be a unique environment for him. Also of note, I interviewed Travis Reier from Bama Online and 24/7 Sports today, and he also mentioned that the center has not played in this type of setting either. So be loud on Saturday, because the communication for Bama between the quarterback and center, 2 most important positions on the offense for communication, they are not experienced in this environment. So be extra loud on Saturday if you need any more motivation. But his scrambling ability, it makes it tough to bring him down. And I worry a little bit that it's going to cause a fella by the name of Todd to get impatient and start drawing up some extra blitzes. What do you think about that one?
I don't know. So Young has been very, very good thus far, right? He's got a QB rating of 180.1. He's averaged 8.8 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions thus far, completing about 70% of his passes. But his yards above replacement, which is the way I measure quarterbacks who can run and can throw, is 1.12, which is better than average and actually very, very good. But 2 is like a Heisman level candidate. So he is not playing at the level of Mac Jones and what Mac Jones did last year. Mac Jones came right out of the chute and had a yards above replacement around 3. He was averaging like 11 yards an attempt. Bryce Young is not Mac Jones, or at least has not been Mac Jones yet. He also only has 4 rushes for 0 yards. Now, obviously, sacks are factored into rush yards, but for somebody that we think of as a dual threat quarterback, I don't see him as that type of guy, at least not in the first couple of games. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to break out running plays and things like that for him, but that doesn't seem like what Saban and Bill O'Brien necessarily want to do. And so I don't think that Florida is really in dire straits if they now you got to hold your rush lanes. I mean, he's going to be able to get you a 5 or 6 yard run on 3rd and 5 if you need it. But to be honest, if your biggest worry is Bryce Young getting 5 or 6 yards on 3rd down, I think you're probably doing okay. I'm much more worried about him hitting a 50 yarder on 3rd and 6 than I am him rushing for 5 or 6 yards. I think your concerns about Grantham are warranted, except for the fact that Grantham seems to be able to dial up blitzes that become difficult for young quarterbacks to diagnose. The issue that Grantham has always had is with guys like Fromm, who've been around forever, and guys like Joe Burrow, once he'd been around for a long time. And those sorts of quarterbacks are the ones who have always given him fits when they've been able to diagnose the blitz and then take advantage of it. If Florida's able to bring blitzes and actually cover on the back end correctly when they bring those blitzes, then I think there's going to be an opportunity to get to Young and have a couple of turnovers just because he's young and he hasn't necessarily seen a Todd Grantham defense yet. Now, with all that being said, he's an incredibly talented player and he's going to be able to buy extra time. The guys are going to have to stay in their rush lanes. They're going to have to be disciplined. The defense is going to have to play better than it has the first couple of games. But I think the thing that sort of comforts me a little bit coming into this one is that Bryce Young and Mac Jones in their first couple of games, it's not even close. Mac Jones was just winging the ball all over the place. Bryce Young has hit some big ones, but he's also been somewhat inconsistent. And I think there will be some opportunities for Florida to take advantage.
Well, so speaking on those inconsistencies, what are some holes in this game that you've seen so far?
Well, I'll tell you, he threw a really bad out pass against Miami that I think a decent quarterback picks and takes the other way for 6. It was on their first drive. And then after that, he hit a touchdown like 2 plays later on a deep cross, but the guy was wide open. And I think that's one of the things is when you go back and look at that Miami tape, the big plays that they hit, it wasn't like Young was throwing somebody open. It was a guy who was wide open streaking down the field. And you can say the same thing about Anthony Richardson hitting Jacob Copeland last week, right? That he's wide open going across the field. The scheme is going to have to be solid. They're going to have coverage in the right spots. They're going to have to make sure that they don't give up those big plays. But I think if you limit those big plays and dare Bryce Young to drive them down the field on a 15 play, 16 play, 17 play drive, I think you're going to be able to force some 4th downs. I don't think he's consistent enough to be able to drive them down the field that way. Now, again, you give up 3 50-yard plays and you're going to be way behind and it's going to look like your team's been absolutely trounced. But I think that was the thing I saw is that his ball placement was a little bit inconsistent, that he was not always going to the right receiver. But when he got one that was obvious, where it was a deep shot, he wasn't missing. And so you're going to have to cover that up. You're going to have to prevent that. You're going to have to make sure that they don't hit that one.
That's a look at the quarterbacks. Let's move on to 4 bits. The Florida offense versus the Bama defense. And this is a note about the Crimson Tide offense, but it's relevant because the Florida offense, if they're going to win this game, the Crimson Tide will be looking to score 30 or more points for the 29th consecutive game. That's the longest current FBS scoring streak and is closing in on the all-time record of games at 31. So got to bring the scoring, which I don't think a lot of fans would be surprised to hear that you're probably scoring over 30 to beat Bama here, but the true running threats at the quarterback position in Gainesville have really done wonders for this Florida offense. And it really has helped the line specifically. This running game has become lethal with Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson back there opening things up. It's helped the running backs, helped the offensive line, helped the whole deal. But before we dive in, we did see an injury to Gene Delance last weekend. Will, any updates on his status for the game?
It sounded like it was a bruise. Sounds like he's probable to play, which is a big deal, right? Obviously, Delance has been sort of a punching bag for some of the pundits and especially some of the fans during this offseason. But, one of the things we've been looking at is with the switch to the running offense, that's one of Delance's strengths. And certainly him and Stuart Reese have been a big part of why Florida's been able to rush for almost, 800 yards in the first couple of games. And so him being back healthy, I think, is going to be a big part of the game when it comes to being able to really sort of have those road graders out there to make sure Florida's able to run the ball.
A couple injury notes to make on the Alabama side. Linebacker Christopher Allen fractured his foot in the Miami game. He's out for the season. Will Anderson, Mercer, a little cut block there by the Mercer Bears in the second half. Will Anderson ends up injuring his knee. That's the all-world Jack linebacker for Miami, 5-star guy. Plays with, as Travis Reier said, plays with the motor every single down. And really, the key to their defense might be he called Will Anderson the best player on their roster. But Nick Saban said to the media this week, from an injury standpoint, Will Anderson has been very encouraging. He'll probably take the day off earlier in the week here. He's day to day, but we feel a little more encouraged than maybe we did after the game. And two other players that were missing from Alabama's game against Mercer were defensive backs Josh Jobe and Jalen Armour Davis. So the defensive backfield was a little worn down. We actually saw that defensive backfield give up a couple of big passes to Mercer late in the second half there, but those guys should be playing in Gainesville on Saturday here. Another player to watch up front, Phil Mathis leads the UA defensive lineman in tackles with 8 and sacks with 2. So a lot of challenges up front there for the Gators. And looks like Bama's secondary will be getting back toward full strength as we enter into Saturday's game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an Alabama defense, right? They're going to be well coached. They're going to know what they're doing, and they're going to get out there and get after the quarterback. One thing I do think is interesting is that they have not gotten into the backfield as much this season as they have previously, at least in the first 2 games. I believe it's only 9 tackles for loss, 4 sacks in the first 2 games, not getting the backfield an awful lot. And so when you think about what Florida's going to try to do up front compared to what the strength of Alabama's defense is, I think you start to look at it and say, okay, well, now maybe we have an opportunity to do something, particularly considering that they're going to have they're going to have the quarterbacks really functioning in the running game. If you look, Alabama's given up 21 rushes for 30 yards for quarterbacks, so 1.4 yards per rush. What that indicates, oftentimes you'll see the rush yards for quarterbacks be in the negative. So Florida's given up 20 rush attempts for negative 14 yards to quarterbacks. What that tells you is that Alabama's not getting in the backfield, not sacking the opposition. And I think, Nick Saban sort of lit into his team after the game against Mercer. And I think that was justified in some respects because they're also giving up 6.9 yards per attempt through the air, which is a little bit below the NCAA average. But it's so if you look overall in terms of the way Alabama's played against opposing quarterbacks, I've got them 3rd from last in the SEC. It's behind LSU, who got absolutely torched by UCLA. The only teams they're in front of are Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. And so there are some holes here. I don't know whether Florida is good enough to take advantage of those holes. But the nice part is since they're not getting to the quarterback, at least not extensively, then what that says is that when Emory Jones drops back to pass or when Anthony Richardson drops back to pass, they should have time to make the decisions that they need to make. They're not going to be throwing under duress the entire game, you wouldn't think, based on the way the offensive line has played thus far and then the way Alabama's defensive line has played thus far this year.
We've seen the Tennessee linebacker Henry To'oTo'o step over into the Mike role, and really it's been, from everything you read and hear, it's been a seamless transition over into the Bama defense. It's opened things up for Christian Harris, who just flies around, makes a lot of tackles at that will position, and really up front, you're right, Alabama has not been tested like they're going to be this Saturday. But do you expect Florida to be able to match up well with this defensive front? And really, even if the passing game, we obviously got a hit in the passing game, but the focus is still going to be on the ground. The focus is going to be on the ground for the Gators in order to bust big plays still and keep that side of the ball that Alabama has to respect on the running game. Are we expecting Florida to be able to dictate things on the ground?
I mean, I think they're going to have to. I think that if you look at Emory Jones, he's averaged something like 6.5 yards per rush over his career, somewhere in that range. We're going to need that, right? Florida's going to need that in this game. You're not going to be able to have Emory Jones have 12 rushes for 16 yards and have a successful offensive day. That's not going to happen. He needs 12 rushes for 85 yards, something like that, in order to say, yeah, there's an opportunity here, even if he only sort of averages 7 yards a throw. If he's averaging 6 yards a run, then Florida's going to be able to move the ball down the field. If he's only averaging 1.5 yards, 2 yards per run, then all of a sudden you're in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And those are not situations that I think Florida wants to be in against this Alabama defense. I think, for all the praise that we've given for Gene Delance, we haven't seen him have to hold up at right tackle on a 3rd and 11 when the opposition knows Florida has to throw the ball. And, just as I sort of said, Florida might be able to get to Bryce Young. I suspect Alabama will be able to get to Emory Jones or Anthony Richardson if they have to drop back on 3rd and long. And it's known that they're not going to run the ball. Now, the good news is both of those guys are explosive enough that even 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12, you still have to be concerned about them running the ball. You can't just pin your ears back and come after them, which again, I think sort of bodes well for Florida, especially on like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, that Alabama, I'm pretty sure at the defensive end spot is going to make sure they don't run past the quarterback. And so if Florida can hold up on the inside, I think that's really sort of the important thing is the center and the 2 guards can't get knocked back into Emory Jones' face. They need to allow him space to step up so that those defensive ends coming around the edge, then there's holes on either side. He'll be able to pick, does he want to run out of the pocket on a 3rd and 6, or is he going to be able to catch somebody maybe coming across the middle?
Which receivers outside? We've seen Jacob Copeland have some moments. We saw Xavier Henderson make some plays. Which receivers are you looking for to step up in this game against Bama? And really, is there a name that we haven't heard that much this year that you're hoping to see a little more of?
I think we need Trent Whittemore, 5 or 6 catches. There are a lot of plays, if you go back and look at the film, the last 2 games where there are guys dragging across the middle. It's not always Whittemore, but oftentimes it is Whittemore sort of dragging across the middle, and he's open. And if you remember, a lot of times last year, Kyle Trask would hit Kadarius Toney coming across the middle. Now, Toney could get himself open even if he wasn't. You gave him one-on-one coverage. He was going to sort of twist the defender and get open. But, I mean, there were a couple of cases in the game the other day where there was a guy drifting across the middle right at the sticks who was wide open, and all you had to do was deliver the ball and you were going to get a first down, and the ball didn't get delivered. And that isn't just Emory Jones. I mean, those sorts of things have existed for Anthony Richardson. He just hasn't been in there. He hasn't been in there long enough to be able to see whether he's going to pick those sorts of things up. But those are the things I really want to see from the Florida offense. I want to see on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, do they hit the guy coming across the middle? Do they throw to the open guy when Alabama sort of, when they've got a linebacker one-on-one coverage against Whittemore, when he sort of lines up in the slot or kind of at a little bit of a tight end type of position? We haven't seen the tight ends at all, right? And one of the reasons
that was my next question.
Well, one of the reasons we haven't seen them is because those guys catch the ball over the middle, right? And they're not usually the first read. And so I think those are sort of the things that, Whittemore in particular, and then Keon Zipper are probably the 2 guys that if you see those guys targeted 4 or 5 times in the game, then that tells you that Emory Jones is going through his progressions and he's being effective at going through his progressions because he's leaving the first guy that he wanted to go to, that Saban has figured out, we're going to take that guy away, and he's quickly checking down to where he needs to go.
Hopefully we see a little more diversity in that passing game this week. Let's move to 6 bits. We'll talk about the Bama offense and the Florida defense. I don't know if you've been able to see some of those. For anyone who hasn't seen it, go look up some of those Bama clips, just steamrolling the Miami defensive front. The offensive line for Bama, you got Evan Neal, who's going to be a top 10 pick in next April's NFL draft. You see some struggles, though. A more experienced guy, Chris Owens, at the right tackle position, talked about it in the interview with Travis Reier coming up on Thursday on the channel here. He hasn't been doing as well at that right tackle position after playing some center last year. And we're seeing some inconsistencies from this Bama front, even though when they're good, they're very good. Any chance that this Gator defensive front exposes the Bama offensive line this weekend?
I don't know about exposing the defensive line. I think you probably hope that they play it to a draw. I mean, if you look, one thing I do think they have going in their favor, obviously Ventrell Miller looks like he's going to be out with an elbow injury. That may be a problem, but one of the things they have done is they brought Jeremiah Moon inside to give a little bit more size. And last year when Alabama sort of brought pulling guards around, the linebackers just got absolutely mauled. And so having somebody like Jeremiah Moon in there who's able to take on the pulling guard in the hole, if he's able to do that and plug the hole and allow everybody else to sort of find their way over and tackle the running back, I think that'll make a difference. The other thing is that Alabama, even against Mercer, didn't run the ball great. 4.6 yards per rush against Mercer. I mean, you're talking about an FCS team that they're running, 34 for 158. They only averaged 3.9 yards per rush against Miami. So for all of the blew them off the field and, Bryce Young played very well and all that sort of stuff, they're 61st now in FBS in yards per rush attempt. And so that, I think, is one of the things that we'll probably get to it when we talk to keys of the game. But the idea that they are not a juggernaut, at least thus far in the first couple of games, in terms of being able to run the ball, which is really different for an Alabama team when you think about the last few years with Najee Harris and Damian Harris, and even all the way back to Mark Ingram back in 2009, they are not that same team in terms of, and Trent Richardson, in terms of being able to just put the head down, go for 4 yards a pop, and no matter what, you can't get them off the field because they're always going to convert 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3. I don't know if they're that type of team, and that's maybe where Florida can take advantage if they're able to stop them a few times.
Well, that's actually leading into the next point here. Brian Robinson's leading the way in the backfield right now for the Tide. Senior, I believe he's actually from Tuscaloosa too. We've seen a lot of him in the past couple seasons, but they don't have that definitive next guy right now. There's not that Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram to Najee Harris type of player in the backfield. And I, from what I've seen so far, Will, I'm not seeing a big receiving threat out of the backfield. And that's something that killed the Gators in the SEC title game.
Yeah, I mean, look, Najee Harris absolutely drove us nuts last year in the SEC title game. That game was relatively close until the last couple of drives of the first half, and especially the last one where Mac Jones basically just threw it to Najee Harris the entire time, and he made Florida's linebackers look terrible. And so I think that is a big part of it, right? I mean, you look at Brian Robinson, 5.3 yards per rush last year. Najee Harris was 5.8, but that was on 200 or 160 more carries. And so Brian Robinson, you would expect him to be more efficient than Najee Harris since he had less carries, but he doesn't. So it looks like he's a good running back, but not a great running back. And I think that makes a difference. The other thing is Brian Robinson only had 6 catches last year, 43 for Najee Harris. Again, to your point, are they going to be able to kill Florida's linebackers in coverage? And then the other thing is that Diabate has had an entire year to sort of stew on all of the stuff that Alabama was able to do to them in the SEC championship game. I suspect he's going to be prepared for some of the things that they had. And if you think about some of the plays where Harris came open, they were really some things where he and Mac Jones were just really, really in tune. And the question I have is, are Brian Robinson and Bryce Young going to be able to do that same thing? They haven't shown it yet. We'll see whether they can do it in this one. But I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic that Florida's defense is going to be able to stop Alabama in some capacity, that they're not going to give up 52 points to Alabama unless there's a bunch of turnovers on the Florida side. But they're still going to give up some points. They're still going to give up some yards. This is a very good Alabama team. But I think last year was really a transcendent Alabama team. And I just think they're well deserving of their number one ranking, but I don't think they're the number one ranked Alabama team from last year that Florida was actually pretty close to. And so, this Gator team, I don't think is going to be intimidated. I think that's also a big factor.
And listen, I'm gaining a little bit of optimism there, talking about the O-line and the running back situation so far. But let's head to the strength of this Bama offense. And in my opinion, it's the wide receiver room. You got John Mechie coming back for another season. We saw him in the Miami game. He scored that first touchdown that you referred to on that wide open crossing route. Jamison Williams been a good add for them. He comes over from the Ohio State Buckeyes, transfer, number 1 for Bama there. He's had a lot of catches this season. He's playing well. A couple of explosive plays out of him. Slade Bolden, he's not going to make the big highlight, but he's just one of those steady players for the Crimson Tide. Nick Saban compared JoJo Earl to Jalen Waddle this last couple of weeks here. So that's a pretty strong comparison. And one of the guys from Tampa, Florida here, Ajay Hall, freshman, hasn't made that many catches. I think he only has 1 catch on the season so far, but just a guy to keep an eye on, especially in the red zone when the Tide are driving.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is where Florida or Grantham's going to make his money. Is the Florida defensive backs thus far in the first 2 games have been relatively unimpressive. I think Kyrie Elam has played very, very well. I think Jason Marshall and Avery Helm have not. I think Elijah Blade's injury is probably, he was out the second half of the first game. He was out all the last game. I don't think he's going to be back for this one.
What's he dealing with, Will?
I don't know. Is it a groin, I think? So he's dealing with something like that. So there's not a ton of depth, and Florida's second quarterback has really struggled thus far. I think Darius Perkins has actually been pretty good at star, but when you start thinking about what Alabama's going to be able to do, I mean, I'm sort of hearkening back to, what was it? Was it CJ McWilliams who had to come in as the second quarterback against Georgia a couple years ago, or maybe it was LSU, and they just targeted him relentlessly until they finally had to take him out of the game. I think that is my worry when it comes to this one, is that Alabama is going to have a mismatch somewhere one-on-one because they have a guy who's just as fast or faster than every guy that Florida has on the field. At some point, you're going to have to leave guys one-on-one. The question is going to be, can the defensive line get to Bryce Young and make him throw it up there before he finds the one-on-one matchup and allows the guy to get open? I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. I don't know that Helm and Marshall, and then the safeties as well. I mean, the safeties, there were a couple of plays where it looked like the corners got beat the other day against USF. I actually think those were safety mistakes where they were supposed to be the deepest guy in the field, and they got sort of caught up with routes going on in front of them, and then the ball wound up over their head. Certainly the sort of toss back to the halfback who then threw it down the field. They had a guy wide open past, was it Trevez Johnson, I think, who got caught on that one. I might be wrong. But anyway, the safety play has been suspect. The second corner play has been suspect. Doesn't mean those guys aren't getting better, but it's a far cry between FAU and USF and Alabama's wide receivers. And I think this is where Alabama has a real advantage, is the wide receivers against Florida's secondary. The defensive line is going to have to get to Bryce Young, because I'm sure they're going to be, in a Grantham defense anyway, ever since 2018, there have always been guys who've gotten open past the defense. And, against the Kentuckys of the world and against the Vanderbilts of the world and the South Carolinas of the world, they haven't been able to take advantage of it. Every time he's played LSU with Burrow, when he played Georgia with Fromm, when he's played anybody who's really any good at quarterback, they've really been able to take advantage when they had that shot down the field. Bryce Young's shown that it looks like he can take advantage of that. And that would be my biggest worry if I'm a Gator fan, is, this is one game where I'm not going to get upset if Grantham plays off and gives them first downs and sort of dares them to go down the field on long extended drives. I think in some capacity that might actually be the way you want to play this one, just to make it so that you don't get beat deep, because those quick strikes are going to be the ones that just kill you.
We've yet to see anyone really step up and solidify themselves as cornerback too. Helms was the guy coming in game one. Do you expect this to be the game that we really see the transition to Marshall, though, where Marshall really gets that opportunity to earn the spot?
I mean, no, I think there's been the guys on that side have not been getting their head around when they've been put in one-on-one coverage. And so there've been pass interference penalties, not really a whole lot of pass breakups when the ball's gone in that direction. I'm very concerned about that. And I mean, look, Jason Marshall's gonna be a really good player. And I think he's a good player right now, but you put him up against these 5-star guys who are coming from Alabama, and the question becomes, can they hold up? And the good news is that other than John Mechie, these guys are all relatively young and inexperienced because of all the experience that Florida had last year, because Billingsley isn't playing. But when you factor in sort of their pedigree and their speed, if Bryce Young underthrows it, I think they're going to get a couple of pass interference penalties, and those pass interference penalties are just killers, right? I mean, you work really hard to get them to like 3rd and 12, and then they just sort of throw up a fade to the wide receiver, and the wide receiver sort of just stops and lets the defensive back bowl into him when you get a pass interference. Those are going to be killers. Florida has to avoid those. They got to find a way to make sure that the cornerback gets his head around. Even if they catch it once, I think it's okay. But just to bowl into them and bail them out on those and have pass interference. We've seen Marco Wilson do that a lot the last couple of years. We can't have that in this game. That'll just be a killer.
Cam Latu has been the tight end of choice so far. We've not seen a ton of Jaleel Billingsley. There were some injury issues, maybe some off the field stuff going on with him so far that's really prevented him from playing. Similar situation, it sounds like, with Bama, where the tight end just hasn't been that incorporated into the offense through 2 games so far.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think last year they were very reliant on their wide receivers, and they've had some guys at tight end who've been halfway decent, but they've had one guy who went to the Buccaneers. I can't remember his name, but OJ Howard, who was really, really good. Last year they had Miller Forrestall there, who was at tight end, and he graduated, and so now you don't have that guy, sort of the guy who can get you 5-6 yards on first down and set you up 2nd and 4 when you want to sort of run something that's kind of like a running play and just sort of get yourself in ahead of the sticks. And they don't have that guy this year, or at least haven't seen him yet. Between Forrestall and Billingsley, that's 41 receptions for last year that they don't have right now on this team. So again, I think they're going to be, this is one of those things where I think it was like 2018, Georgia was incredibly reliant on their wide receivers outside. Fromm just threw outside all the time. And then when those wide receivers all graduated, things started to slow down a little bit. I think some of the things that we've seen with Bryce Young in terms of comparing him to Mac Jones probably has to do with all the guys who are gone, right? No Devontae Smith, no Jalen Waddle.
Right.
It's a little bit unfair to say, hey, why don't you go out and play like Mac Jones, who averaged something like 11 yards a throw last year. So Bryce Young's been really good, but like I said, this offense has been less explosive. They're scoring 46 points a game, but one of the teams they played is Mercer, and then the other one is a team that barely beat Appalachian State. So I'm not sure how good Miami is. I don't think any of us know how good Miami is. Would Miami and FAU be a decent game? Maybe. Based on Appalachian State, it might be. And so I'm not sure Alabama's been tested this year. Even though they played a team that was ranked in the top 25, I'm not sure Miami deserved it. And so we'll see, right? I mean, we'll see what happens as this goes on. But the wide receiver corner matchup is definitely the one that I'm watching in terms of what Grantham does and whether, all the talk about wanting to play press. I don't think that's the right strategy in this one, but we'll see what he does.
So a huge concern there that was Alabama wide receivers. We'll probably see plenty of formations with at least 3 receivers on the field, as that depth will test the depth of the Florida secondary and might make us sweat a little bit here on Saturday. All right, let's move on to $1, and we'll go to the keys of the game for the Florida Gators to get a victory here. And I'm going to start with the first one here, Will. So it's start fast. We fell behind in the SEC championship game, and we were playing catch up. The score ended up looking pretty good on paper, but really we were chasing Bama the entire second half. And this offense with this running game, if you could strike first and be able to hold the ball and just eat the clock over and over and over again on each drive, I think that's going to help a ton with this team, and it'll build confidence early.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not just Alabama where Florida's fallen behind in big games. They fell behind against Georgia last year, 14-0. Were able to come back. They fell behind against LSU. They had the fumble for Kyle Trask, right, going in sort of at the end of the half that got returned for a touchdown. All of a sudden, you're down going to the half against LSU. They never could quite pull away from Texas A&M, even though I think they were ahead at the half. Sort of at the end of the third quarter, they had fallen behind at that point. And then even if you look previously, the year before against Joe Burrow, where all of a sudden LSU, it just seemed like was always up by a touchdown, and Florida was able to come right back and answer, but they just couldn't get that stop. Same thing with Georgia that year with all the wristband fiasco and all that sort of stuff. They wound up behind early. So in these big games under Dan Mullen, Florida has fallen behind early over and over and over again. And last year against Georgia, you could say, hey, there was a lot of pressure on those guys to deliver. And last year against Alabama, you could say, hey, Alabama was an intimidating team, and they go out there and fall behind. I think it was 35-17 at the half. But I think they should have gained some confidence by going out there and coming back and making that a close game at the end. They should have gained some confidence by Trey Dean getting that interception. Obviously, he gets earholed after it and fumbles, but
targeting.
Absolutely. But, Trey Dean's going to be out there at safety. And so he should have some confidence that they're able to hang with the wide. I mean, if you hung with Waddle and you hung with Devontae Smith last year, at least somewhat, you should have some confidence you can hang with these guys. Same thing with the defensive line, right? I mean, Brenton Cox has a lot of experience. Zachary Carter has a lot of experience. The transfers from Auburn have a lot of experience. And so there's no excuse to be intimidated by Alabama. These guys have all played Alabama. And so you can't fall behind 14-0 with a team that isn't going to be able to throw the ball, right? I mean, last year with Kyle Trask, you had a shot if you fell behind 14-0. This one, it's going to get ugly real quick, because if you have to ask Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson to drop back and pass to play catch up, that's not what Dan Mullen wants to do. That's not what this offense is built to do. And quite honestly, one of the biggest weapons they have is the quarterbacks being able to run the ball. And if the defense just says, yeah, go ahead, get 6 or 7 yards, we don't care, because, you're going to run clock and that's what we want. Well, you can't end up in that situation. So, the intimidation factor shouldn't be there. They should be fully equipped and ready to take on Alabama from a confidence standpoint. And then it's just a question of, can you come out, start fast, get ahead, and then, like you said, use your running game to lean on Alabama and make Bryce Young start to press. And then can you get a play or two where you end up with a pick six because he starts to press, he starts to make some throws he shouldn't, and then the defensive line can sort of pin its ears back and come after him.
Right, and that's really the big reason we're down early in the SEC title game, the defense was about as helpless as I've ever seen a Florida Gators defense in that first half against Alabama. We cannot see a repeat of that on Saturday. So
I mean, I don't know. Did you watch them against Texas A&M? I mean, or all of 2020?
It was
it was
extra
not
helpless. It was extra helpless in the first half with that Najee Harris screen pass, dump pass. And I just felt worse. Yeah, there were some bad moments in 2020, but it was extra hopeless in that first half. So it was a good fight in the second half. They came out and they played a little better in that second half. And to your point, Will, I like the point you made about the intimidation factor. I think a lot of teams with Alabama coming to town, they hype themselves up, maybe even overhype themselves to a point where they don't show up and play their best. But hey, this team just played Alabama in December. You haven't gone through a whole season. That game is still very fresh in the minds of these players and our fans, and they'll be locked and loaded for this one. Another thing we want to see, if you got keys to success for the Gators, explosive plays in the run game. We've seen a ton of them in the first 2 weeks. And yes, it was FAU. Yes, it was USF. But we don't want to see a big dip in terms of, like, just because you're playing Alabama, the run game is what you're going to need to win this game. And you shouldn't see a lack of explosive plays at all throughout the day if the Gators are going to have a shot.
Well, I mean, Florida's third in the country in rush yards per, or in average yards per rush, 8.5 yards per rush. If you look at it now, obviously 430 of those yards have come from the quarterbacks, but that means 300 and something yards have come from the running backs. And yes, they've averaged less than the quarterbacks have because the quarterbacks are averaging almost 13 yards per attempt. At the same time, Malik Davis has played very well. Dameon Pierce has played very well. DeMarcus Bowman, quite honestly, has played really well when they've given him the ball as well. A couple of explosive plays out of him. And so, yeah, it's the strength of the offense. We've known it all offseason. We knew all offseason this was going to be transitioning to a running offense. And I think we all looked at it and said, is the offensive line going to be good enough to be able to allow that to happen? Then Stuart Reese came out and was the best player on the field other than Anthony Richardson in that opener against FAU. And I think the offensive line really acquitted itself well against USF as well. Now, obviously, Alabama's a very different beast, and I don't think they're going to average 8.5 yards per rush, but they need to average like 6.5 or 7. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to have to pop some big plays. The big plays are not all going to come through the pass game like they did last year. So Florida, to get to 40 points, is going to need like 8 or 9 explosive plays, 20 plus yards. Maybe they can get there with 6 or 7, but they're going to need somewhere between 7 to 9 probably explosive plays. The question is, where's that going to come from? You might get 2 or 3 in the passing game. You're not going to get 7 through the passing game with either of these quarterbacks, even if Anthony Richardson played the entire game. So they're going to have to get 4 or 5, maybe even 6 explosive plays through the ground. And that's not just going to be the quarterbacks. Malik Davis is going to have to hit one. Dameon Pierce is going to have to hit one. DeMarcus Bowman's going to have to hit one. They're going to have to get something from the running backs where, you look up at the end of the night and say, hey, one of Florida's running backs has 14 carries for 125 yards. That's how Florida ends up winning this game. If they pair 100 and something yards from the running backs on 14 carries with 12 carries or 16 carries from the quarterbacks for 100, 125, 130 yards as well.
Key number 3, and this is for the defense, make them earn it. Bend but don't break. You don't want to see those wide open guys streaking through, similar to that first touchdown we saw against Miami. We saw a few times in that SEC championship game as well. Right after the targeting call, I believe they hit Devonta Smith on a busted coverage. You want to make them have those long, sustained drives. This Alabama offense is definitely going to score quite a bit, but you want to make them earn it all night long.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of applies to some other things as well, right? So, Mercer gave up the first 7 points the other day on a block punt that got returned. You can't give up that kind of crap either, right? I mean, you give up a block punt that gets returned for a touchdown and just spot Alabama 7 points, it isn't going to work. But we already talked about the defensive backs and that sort of being the space that's the most questionable for Florida, and the space where Alabama wants to succeed is through the air, and where they have succeeded thus far is through the air. And so, yeah, I think, the more you can make Bryce Young drop back and have to make decisions. And this is one of those things where, a lot of zones, right? And really sort of confusing him. I would love to see them sort of show cover one shells and then run back into zones and do some things post snap that make Bryce Young confused and do those sorts of things, but at the same time have protection, right? So that you're not getting beat on those big long throws. I'm okay with a 22-yard throw to the sideline. But if they hit a 70-yarder, it's just a backbreaker. It kills the crowd, kills the momentum, obviously amps up Alabama, but also, sort of that intimidation factor starts to take over as well. And, again, Florida's offense, though it's been explosive in the first two games, has been explosive through the ground. I think Alabama's going to be able to sort of curtail that explosiveness. And so Florida's going to have to do the same thing when it comes to Alabama to keep this one close.
Magic number for the Gators, key number 4 here. Magic number on the scoreboard. We want to see at least 35 points for a victory. Like we said, it's Alabama. I opened Alabama or the offensive section saying Alabama has scored 30 plus points in 29 straight games. This offense, it's going to score. It doesn't matter who's running it. But if the Gators can keep the ball on the ground, keep some time of possession, and score up to 35, I think you got a great shot at this one. I don't think we're going to see a 52-46 type shootout like we saw in Atlanta.
No, I mean, I hope not, because I don't think Florida wins one of those. But, Florida's left a lot of points on the field. They scored 35, obviously, against Florida Atlantic, 42 against South Florida, but multiple times down in the red zone, unable to convert. Those are the things that they're going to have to convert in this one if they're going to win. But I think Florida was probably trying some things down the red zone against those two guys. And now it's going to be quarterback power, either with Richardson or with Emory Jones when they get down there. And there's going to be some opportunities to convert. So I expect Florida to be able to come out and move the ball against Alabama. I don't think this Alabama defense is as good as it was last year. And I think Alabama's defense last year even had some holes in it. Ole Miss certainly showed that. And so, Florida's offense has shown the ability to drive the ball down the field. They couldn't run the ball against either one of these first two opponents last year. If you'd have put that offensive line with that running game and that quarterback on the field, Florida still would have had to chuck it all over the place because they weren't able to run the ball last year. That has changed. That has completely shifted. And so, if they're able to run the ball against Alabama, I think they're going to be able to put up 30, 35 points. Are they going to be able to keep Alabama under 35? I don't know. But if they don't get to 35, I don't think they're going to win. I think Alabama is too good to sit there and say, oh, we're going to win a 27-17 or, 20-14. That ain't happening, right? Like, you're going to have to win this one 35-31 or, something like that in order to get the win. I don't think you're going to be able to get by with scoring, 24 points. I just don't think that'll get the job done.
All right, to review here, start fast, explosive plays in the run game, make them earn it, bend but don't break, and the magic number is 35. Spurrier says we're pulling the upset, Will. The Swamp's going to be packed. Let's hope those young Alabama guys, they learn how to travel on Saturday in the SEC the hard way. You'll be there in Gainesville.
I will be tailgating with the Harmonic Woods Tailgaters. So come on out, say hi. Love to see everybody out there, and certainly, excited for this one. It's interesting. You start thinking back to these sorts of games, and we had LSU back in 2018, where Burrow throws the interception that gets returned. You had the Auburn game, in 2019. You had the you had the Ole Miss game back in 2015. You had the LSU game where Florida just sort of ran roughshod over them back in 2012. But these kinds of games in the Swamp don't happen all that often. And so you really got to value it. I mean, I love college football, but the atmosphere and the electricity for one of these things, like when I was a student and we had a big game like this, I was there for Miami and Florida real early in the season in 2002. It turned out to be disappointing for Florida, but waking up on campus with the buzz for that game was just awesome. So if you're a student, do not take this for granted. They don't come around all that often. If you're an alumni, they don't come around all that often. And so enjoy it, savor it, have some fun with your family and your friends. And, obviously we hope the Gators come out with a win, but if nothing else, it's awesome to have this kind of matchup in the Swamp early in the year and hope that Florida can win, right? I don't think this is an easy win. I don't think this is something that if you asked me to pick it, I'm not sure I'd pick Florida. But I don't think this is a 90-10 proposition. I think there are paths for Florida to get the win here, and that's exciting because I think in 2015 and 2016 in those SEC championship games, I think I might have even written an article the last time Florida played Alabama in the SEC championship with under Jim McElwain, sort of the case for, or like, how is Florida going to win it? And I didn't believe it, right? But now I think there actually is a case for Florida to win this game, and that's because of Dan Mullen. And we need to be excited that we have that opportunity this weekend.
You used the right word there. It's hope. It's not. There's a chance. You got a chance, and that's all you want in these big games. Gators, they come out and play well. They got a very good shot of pulling off a program-defining win in the Dan Mullen era. Speaking of which, we will do what would that win mean in our bonus episode on Patreon. So thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. But if you're not a subscriber yet, be sure to go over on Patreon and check out the Read and Reaction channel where we post bonus stand-up and holler content every week. Will, you got any final words before we head out?
Just really appreciate everybody supporting us. And, this has been fun doing stand up and holler. And now we're really getting to the meat of the schedule. So hopefully everybody enjoys the midweek episode here for the Alabama preview and, just really getting jacked, man. Saturday can't come here soon enough. That's for sure.
Yeah, this isn't the middle of June where you're digging for content, is it? We had to do 2 episodes this week to fit it all in. But hey, I'm happy to do it. Plenty to talk about this week. Tide is rolling in to Gainesville. We'll see how it goes. We'll see y'all next week in the post game. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.